Welcome to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast channel for sustainable procurement. We hope you like what you hear. Please go to www.iso2400.org for more information, learning resources, tools, and much more.
Welcome to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast for sustainable procurement. I'm Shaun McCarthy, Director of Action Sustainability Community Interest Company, and I'm delighted today to introduce Jane O'Toole from New Zealand. Hello, Jane, and welcome.
Welcome. Morning for me, evening for you.
Absolutely, that's right. Yeah, we're a long way apart in time zones. It's 6:30
Yeah.
for Jane. Okay, Jane, so would you like just to tell us a bit about yourself, your background, what you've done in the past, and then what brought you to, you're obviously upon living in New Zealand, what got you there?
Sure. So as you can tell, I don't actually come from New Zealand, but I do live in New Zealand. So I come from the Midlands, Leicestershire, Hinckley, for anyone who knows that tiny little town. And I moved to New Zealand in 2015. Before that, I worked at the National Grid and I worked in the procurement team, which is a very, very, very large global procurement team. And we worked quite closely with our colleagues in the USA and a little bit in China. A huge job, lots of things go on in that job, as you can imagine. And procurement was very much end to end. So in terms of, strategy, plan, source, and then commercial contract management. So you sort of got involved with everything. And I was there for quite a few years. I was actually at the National Grid for, I think it was about 16 years. Before I was in procurement, I worked for the Gas Emergency Service. So I had pretty good tacit understanding of that organisation. And then I decided to change career and learn to be, as it's termed in National Grid, a buyer. I thought I like buying things, so let's buy things. Turns out I couldn't buy handbags and shoes. It was a little bit more construction orientated or complex services and basically keeping the energy running in the UK. And I decided to study SIPs. So I did my SIPs exams for about 3-year period, I think, and learnt to be a procurement professional in that time. And that was challenging. You can imagine, bringing up a young family, studying and doing, a really busy job was challenging, but it was really, really good. And I absolutely got the war scars from that, which actually is the best way to learn. So that was great. And then I was in the kitchen one day and I was listening to the radio and there was a show at the NEC in Birmingham and it was Down Under Live. And it was Canada, New Zealand and Australia, and they were looking, they've got skill gaps in the country, those countries for certain roles, and they were looking for people. So me and my husband decided we would go and just have a look. And honestly, that was all. We were just a bit intrigued. And obviously I went to speak to the people at the New Zealand stall, and turns out, they were actually doing a huge rebuild after an awful earthquake in Canterbury and Christchurch, as you will probably know. And that is the rebuild essentially of a whole entire city. It isn't just a small rebuild, and there isn't many opportunities in life that you get to be involved in a rebuild of a whole city. Not that you want to have to do that, but if it's going to happen. So, we talked about that a little bit, and all of us in my family had jobs on the skill gaps list. Procurement being one of them, procuring the major construction services mainly and sort of maintenance thereafter of this new city. So the rest is history, as they say. We decided to do it and we said, look, we'll put the house on the market and if it sells, we'll do it. And I honestly was thinking, no, it's not gonna happen. And within a week it sold. So okay, I better do that then. And then I saw a job advert for Christchurch City Council, which was probably exactly the best place to be if you're going to help rebuild of a city. So I applied and got the role as a sort of a procurement specialist at that time. And then I moved and got really involved in, first thing I got involved in was that major construction of, the rebuild of the city. So that was really great. I've been here ever since.
What a story. Amazing. How these things just, kind of happen in life, don't they? So, I mean, a lot of interesting things for that from me, but obviously that move into procurement, we employed 60 people in my business now, and we're getting quite a cohort of younger people coming into the business, and we do have some that have chosen procurement as a profession, but it's quite rare. Nearly all of us something else, don't we, and get into procurement. And I know you said
Yes.
you might be
Yeah.
choosing bags, but what was it that kind of turned your head in terms of a career change into procurement?
Well, it was actually a friend. So I worked with one of my friends, and she decided she wanted to change her career, and she looked into what procurement was. I'm not sure where she got the idea from, but she did. Now, because National Grid is such a huge
Yeah.
organisation, obviously they've got so many different opportunities. You could literally stay there for life, because when you change jobs, you're almost changing companies. It's just so massive. And she went into the procurement team. And she said to me, "You would absolutely love this job. I think this would suit you down to the ground." She said, "It doesn't suit everybody, but I think you could do it." And I thought, yeah, okay. And then after a while, when she started telling me about, what she was doing, I thought, actually, it really does sound good. And then she said, "Look, there's some jobs going out, and they're essentially trainee type jobs. You'd have to sort of go backwards to go forwards, because at the time I was a team leader. I managed quite a few people. I was on shifts. I was managing a big operation on those shifts. So it was quite a big job." And she said, "I really think you should think about it, because it's more of a career than what you're doing. What you're doing, you can only really do where you are." And I was like, okay. So I applied and went through the interview process. And then when I found out about what procurement meant, the impact it has on any business, private sector or public sector, the impact it has on the world is enormous. And I didn't really realise that. And we all know this. We've all been asked, "What do you do?" We say procurement, and the person that's asking you says, "What's that?" We've all been there. And so I didn't realise how big that role in life could be, and how many different things and industries you could get involved with. So that's what then attracted me, and I thought, okay, I think it's worth going backwards to go forward. And luckily, it's worked out.
And also National Grid, as you say, is huge, and of course a former public body, but these days very much a private
Yeah.
sector and very
Yeah.
international. They've got very significant business interest in the States. How was the
Yes.
transition from private sector in the UK to public sector in New Zealand? What was the culture shock like for you?
Yes, good question. Good question. So it was okay. And the reason it was okay is, at the time I worked for National Grid, we had to work under OG regulations at that time.
Yeah.
So we were not public sector, as you rightly said, but we were really heavily regulated. And what that means is really regulated by the government, and at any point could lose their license to operate if they were to do something catastrophically wrong. I mean, it would have to be catastrophically wrong for that to happen, but you are very aware of that when you are working for an organisation like that. And ultimately, that mindset, if you work in then move to pure public sector, you absolutely take that mindset with you, and you are very aware that everything you do is for the public good and not for the commercial bottom line. Notwithstanding, that's also incredibly important, because people are paying for that, what the service that organisation provides. So I just took that mindset with me when I went to work in the public sector, and I think that stood me well.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jane. It's interesting, of course, to understand that a very highly regulated business is very similar to public sector. So tell us a bit more now about your life in New Zealand. What are you doing? What are the challenges for you in terms of procurement?
Yeah, so obviously I worked for Christchurch Council for some time. I actually worked for Christchurch Council, helped with a lot of major construction, which I really enjoyed. And then I moved to Christchurch Airport. It was a kind of a job opportunity I couldn't turn down. It wasn't that I didn't want to stay at the council, but I'd never worked for an airport before, and I thought it'd be quite interesting. So I went to work for them and very quickly became the manager of the team, and I sort of headed up the procurement function. And I spent a year really building a really robust function. And I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying the procurement team was sort of more purchasing focused, and I kind of built them up to be more strategic focused. So I built in their procurement end-to-end processes, including contract management, and implemented a framework which was predicated on not only the government procurement rules, which you need to follow in New Zealand, but also sustainability, which was great, and incidentally won one of their awards for, which was brilliant. That myself and the team worked really hard to make sure that that framework was really centered around sustainability, because it was what at the time, and I think it still is, one of the most important levers within the airport that they need to pull, and they're very focused around the environment. So that was great. And then a job came back up at Christchurch Council, and so I couldn't really turn that one down because it was managing their major infrastructure procurement team, which I really enjoyed when I was there before. So I went and took that job and very quickly became the head of procurement there as well, which was a massive job. You know, it's $1 billion a year out in the market, major infrastructure, right the way through to corporate services, you name it, it's procured. You can imagine maintenance, roading. The Three Waters network is actually maintained by the council in Christchurch. It isn't its own entity, so you've got all of that as well. So I did that job for many years and really enjoyed it. And then the chief executive asked me to stand in and cover, this is going to sound bizarre now, their head of people and culture role whilst they went through a major restructure. So I did, and I was there for, I don't know, about 19 months in the end, did a big transformation of the team, and then decided I wanted to go into consultancy. So now I work for a consultancy organisation called Pareto Toolbox, which is a sort of a boutique consultancy, but I really love it because ultimately, because we're slightly smaller, I get to really work with the clients on a real personal one-to-one basis and really help them with their procurement journeys that they're on. And within New Zealand, I would say the maturity is not as there in terms of how it is in the UK yet. So they're on a journey when it comes to procurement, moving from the transactional tactical purchasing type through to strategic. At the moment, I'm not saying strategic procurement doesn't happen, but it isn't always led by major procurement functions. It's led by the business. And so I work with the business to be able to mature their function, their procurement functions. We do all sorts of stuff, cost out programs, procurement frameworks, sustainability, you name it, we do it. But it's actually quite nice because now I get to work with both public and private sector in New Zealand and help them with wherever they're at in their journey, and that's really great. It also means that because I am the SIPS chair for Christchurch, I work with the other two big cities. I work on the Procurement Excellence Forum. I'm part of that as a member. So I actually am getting to really have an impact in moving the industry. Recently, I went and supported a careers fair at Canterbury University, wearing the procurement hat. So getting university students to really see procurement as an option. So that's my life in New Zealand in terms of work. In terms of personal life, I've got 3 grown-up children now. As you can imagine, being landlocked for so many years in the Midlands, about at least 3 hours away from a beach. We live in a nice house right next to a beach, which I absolutely love, but I am only 45 minutes away from the city, and it isn't a gridlocked 45 minutes either. You drive, so I can live by the beach and work in the city, and I don't think too many people get to say that, which is it's a privilege, to be honest. So yeah,
that sounds pretty good. Very impressive. So you mentioned about potentially New Zealand being a little behind the UK in terms of procurement. I mean, I think it's unsafe to, just for our overseas listeners, it is not right to assume that strategic procurement always happens in the UK as well, but it does.
absolutely.
Pockets. How are you seeing sustainable procurement in New Zealand? I mean, you mentioned sustainability and some of the work that you were doing at Christchurch Council. Well, where is New Zealand at with sustainable procurement?
Now, I would swap that sentence around when it comes to New Zealand. So although, procurement being very near the top table in the UK and having that voice more so than here, I'm not saying, and as you rightly said, that's not everywhere. It's not a carte blanche statement, but there's quite a few parts where procurement needs singing about by the right people. However, sustainability, I would absolutely swap that round. New Zealand is exceptionally passionate about the environment. absolutely the animals, the water, sustaining the planet, social procurement, so in terms of, if you think about sustainability as a wider concept, social, economic, environmental, they are passionate about that. There is a lot of trying to think outside the box. There's a lot of organisations that will innovate and do things for the first time, and with the view of it could work, it might work, it might not, but they're willing to try. If it doesn't, they dust themselves off, carry on. So anything that I've brought into New Zealand has been greatly received, but they didn't necessarily need me to. There was lots of ideas and things going on ultimately anyway. And I guess the nice thing is, when you, let's say, pick up a run-of-the-mill sourcing project, and you got your typical project management, cost, time, quality, you will get asked, well, what about sustainability? You're not forcing it on anybody. It is the other way around. I'd say that New Zealand could be seen as one of the leaders in terms of innovation and wanting to do the right thing in regards to sustainability. And that's just, I have a view based on where I've worked, and I have a view based on the clients I work with. You will probably see on the news, just like every country, the governments change and then things change. And recently we've had national government in, and, you could equal that to how Conservatives and Labour will work in the UK. And ultimately their hat will change. And at the moment we're looking at a commercial squeeze. Now, I don't know how that's going to affect sustainability, because from a central government perspective, the push on sustainability was huge previously. That said, people's mindset won't change. The everyday person trying to do the right job will care about sustainability in the role that they are in.
It's not the first time we've heard that about New Zealand. It's really refreshing to hear that, as a nation, they're very, very passionate about the environment they live in and the society that they live with. Do you have any examples? We're always after case studies. Do you have any examples of really good practice, what that feels like in reality?
Yeah, sure. I might be able to talk about that in the wider concept maybe. So when I was at Christchurch Council, we introduced a procurement framework, which ultimately was procedures that were there to underpin the policy. And they took a brave and bold move. At the time, I was the infrastructure procurement manager in the team. And so I was responsible, I took on the lead actually in terms of the project, to go and train as many staff as I could and stakeholders. I think in the end, it was a good 700 people that went through the training course. And we decided in that framework that the underpinning would be sustainability. And so remembering what I said about the amount of money that's spent across what, we put a minimum 10% requirement on sustainability within any tender, and any tender generally was anything over $100,000 that went out the door. And there was a lot of that, as you can imagine. And notwithstanding, there was still compulsory questions and compulsory focus put on the lower value stuff in terms of, smaller RFQs. That was an enormous change, because suddenly it really does matter what the tender submissions talk about. And $1 billion a year in a market of a New Zealand size in Christchurch, which is considerably, when you talk about people population, smaller than the other two big cities, it fundamentally changes how the market starts to respond. So you are then changing how big suppliers start to tender, and that won't just be to you as an organisation. That will start to change across, other, especially if they are primarily doing public sector work. So we in Christchurch have quite a big footprint from other public sector entities like Ministry of Education, for instance. They've got a massive construction programme. At the same time, they were doing a sustainability drive. As far as I know, Christchurch Council was the first entity to put a minimum 10%, which is massive, weighting on it. And within that 10% weighting, we had compulsory questions around solid waste reduction plans. water use reduction plans, greenhouse gas emission reduction, energy efficiencies, site-specific management, environmental monitoring, diversity and employment, local market. So we had all these compulsory questions in there. We had some that were pass-fail. So we had some that sort of asked if there was an energy efficient management plan, and if there wasn't, when would there be? What was the plan? Was there a plan? If there was not a plan on some of the major stuff, we were just not evaluating that tender any further, because actually they weren't fitting with the culture and the commitment that Christchurch Council was making to the community around environmental outcomes in terms of their wider long-term plan. So we were asking all of those things. Now, one of the biggest tenders my team did at the time, so I was the head of procurement when we went out to procure the services for major construction around a stadium. So it's about a $650 million stadium, I believe now, because I've left, but things change, you know how it is, but it was about 650 million. And we put that up to about 15%. So there was a lot of work done in that tender around not just the standard stuff we wanted to ask, but, you know, end of life wastage material, you know, how they deal with wastage, how they deal with end of life, what alternative materials, how they were going to logistically get that stuff here, how they were going to work with the local market, and that reduces some emissions, increases local jobs. There was a lot of focus around that. Having a 15% around sustainability on the project of that value, to me, really showed there was absolute commitment around sustainability, and they were putting their money where their mouth was. And actually, what we got back was a really cost-effective submission from the winning tenderer. And I've got to say, and I'm going to say it because, you know, you're probably going to ask it, no, sustainability did not cost more. It absolutely did not, because we really pushed innovation and we made the contractor think about how do you do this better and still save the environment. So that's probably one of the biggest real life examples I've got.
That's brilliant, Jane. Thank you. And I completely agree, because I always say sustainability should not cost you more, but bad procurement will. And I think what you just illustrated is an example of good procurement. And it's interesting you talking about New Zealand being ahead. I mean, the UK public sector started to impose rules on 10% evaluation criteria and what they call social value. That was implemented in 2021, sort of. The rules are there, and it's done in some areas and not in other areas. So it's still a little bit patchy. But we are seeing, as you said, some local authorities actually pushing the boundaries of that and going to 15, 20% on the sustainability criteria. And you're right, it makes a difference. Certainly what I've seen in the UK from running the supply chain sustainability school as we do, when that rule started to come in, there was a flurry of activity of organisations actually logging on and doing the learning and all the sort of free stuff that we provide, because suddenly they need to know about this stuff. Suddenly it was serious. It wasn't just, you know, we write all the same old stuff that we've always written, but then when we get the contract, carry on doing what we did before. It really is for real. So that's really impressive to hear. So, yeah. Jane, final question, if I can. A lot of people in our audience don't have the kind of sophisticated knowledge and approach that you have around integrating sustainability into procurement. We've got a lot of people that kind of get told to do sustainable procurement. So the chief exec, you know, suddenly gets the idea that sustainable procurement is a good idea.
Yeah.
And they figure something and say, oi, you know, you're doing sustainable procurement. And that person says, yes, thank you very much, sir or mum. And then they don't really know what to do. What would you be to a procurement person? Because, you know, certainly in my history in procurement, sustainability wasn't a thing back in the day.
Yes.
Trying to get into the world of sustainability.
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue that I had when when sustainability started to grow some legs was really around that it was just a tick box. At that time, it was another thing a chief executive knew was coming, because they're always a bit ahead of the game. So just think about it. Okay, we'll just tick box that. Do you have sustainability policy? Yeah, great. Carry on next. You know, you didn't care. And that sounds awful, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but it was not about anything other than making sure you met the criteria you were being asked to meet. Now, as a complete mindset shift, as we all know, the world talks about it. And as a procurement person, there's a few things that I would do. The first thing I would do is reach out to your network and talk to your colleagues and talk to people that you know, talk to expert bodies. There's a few here in New Zealand that you could talk to. Reach out to your SIPS network or any other procurement type networks you might be in, and ask them to talk about what they do, what they've seen, etc. The second thing I would do is really go and do your homework. I would go and look at United Nations SDG goals, the 17 goals. Those goals are fantastic because they talk so much about what it is that needs to happen. So it gives you that real tacit understanding of what sustainability actually means, and what you can then do is go talk to your stakeholders and go talk to the business that you're supporting, start to really understand what their basic needs and requirements are, and then talk to them about sustainability and start to marry them together. I think it's important to understand what the driver of the organization you are working for is. If there doesn't seem to be much about sustainability, does not mean you can't weave it in. And I always find workshopping with your stakeholders ways that could be applied to enforce sustainability works. The other thing I think you could do, if you don't know where to start, talk to your suppliers, because you can absolutely guarantee your suppliers are already doing stuff. It's just you don't know about it. So that's the other thing I would absolutely do. It's almost like you have a license to be artistic when it comes to sustainability, because there are so many ways you could do it and so many innovative solutions. The world's your oyster. You can just have a go is what. If you don't know what to do, just have a go. You do not need to be an environmental specialist. Great if you've got one and they can work out greenhouse gas emissions, but that is not the only thing we need to worry about. And that's when I would turn my head to looking at, like I said, the United Nations SDG goals, because that really gives you ideas. But reaching out to your network, reaching out to your suppliers, understanding the need of your business, and doing a bit of homework, you'd be amazed how fast you can whiteboard solutions when you start to actually take some time to put your mind to it.
Absolutely brilliant. That's great advice for people in our network. Jane, it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. We could go on for hours, but I guess I need to let you get on with the rest of your day, and we need to get on with
No
the
worries.
rest of the evening. So thank you very much, Jane, for your insights and your history and your advice to our audience and your great case studies. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
It's been great speaking to you. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you for listening to our podcast on Sense and Sustainability. Please listen out for more episodes. For more information, learning resources, tools, and much more content on sustainable procurement, go to www.iso2400.org.